Good afternoon for those in Brazil, and good evening to those in the UK. Again, not only in the UK, but also in other countries, maybe, Ireland. So our research group, GELILT, welcomes everyone to one more of our encounters promoted together with the Department of Modern Languages of Campus V of the University of the State of Bahia, UNEB, based in Santo Antônio de Jesus. You're more than welcome. Last Wednesday, Professor Steve Walsh from Newcastle University talked about corpus linguistics and conversation analysis, discussing appropriate ways to collect classroom talk in order to understand what is really going on in the classrooms. So his talk is related to this one, as today's encounter introduces a framework of reflective practice which suits students, young students, student teachers, early career professionals as well, or experienced teachers. This framework, created and designed by our invited guest, Dr. Paula Zwozdiak-Myers from Brunel University London. Her framework provides a lens and pedagogical tool. It demonstrates and captures evidence of effective practice. So please, everybody, welcome Professor Paula Zwozdiak-Myers. Welcome, Paula.
Good evening, Vera, and thank you so very much for inviting me to share this part of my work with your audience. Would you like me to talk a little bit about how this emerged before I start speaking about the framework, or go straight into it?
Oh, please do, please do.
Right. Well, in my former role, before I joined Brunel University, I was actually head of professional studies at another university, and part of my brief was in my role as head of professional studies was for students in their third year to deliver a module on reflective practice, and then in year 4, when they were out on school placement, or what some might call clinical practice, they needed to engage in action research and to undertake some form of empirical research to improve an element of their practice, or it might be an area of interest for them particularly. And so really, my work with them in terms of trying to come to grips with what can be construed and understood as reflective practice, how this was positioned within a particular form of practitioner research, was really the trigger that enabled me to explore in far more depth this particular type of inquiry. So I think without more ado, right now I'm working at Brunel University London, and my role is quite different. I'm program director for our Doctor of Education research program. And I come into contact now with more mature senior professionals who hold positions of responsibility within their own educational settings. And so I'm now going to go to share screen, if I'm permitted to do so, to get underway. Right.
Okay, take your time.
I need to see where this is. No, you can't see my screen. Can you see the reflective practice first slide at all, Vera?
Yes, now yes.
Oh, okay. So I'll take you from the beginning. Sorry to be so slow. Okay, then. So this is me, and I'm here to share with you the model that I designed on reflective practice for professional development in teacher education. By way of introduction, I would like to say that since the turn of the 20th century, there has been much rhetoric, debate, and educational reform across the national and international professional landscape concerning what teachers are expected to know, understand, and be able to do, in addition to what performance standards constitute effective teaching as they respond to the demands placed upon them by an increasingly complex society. Reflective practice for professional development in teacher education is in the foreground of key drivers advanced by governments and education departments worldwide to raise educational standards and maximize the learning potential of all pupils, with an increasing emphasis being played on professionals for measures of accountability in terms of evidence-based outcomes against prescribed performance criteria. The broad consensus arising from national and international large-scale surveys is that teacher quality is the single most important school variable influencing student achievement, and that characteristics which mark teachers at different stages in their careers should be built on a concept of teaching as praxis, in which theory, practice, and the ability to reflect critically on one's own and others' practice illuminate one another. In the Australian Government Quality Teacher Programme, Whitby proposed that this required teachers who were precise about determining the relevance of new knowledge, were flexible, creative, and adaptive to change, and who were innately curious and capable of asking intelligent questions about the world in which they live and work. As these excerpts begin to illuminate, there are numerous variables and complexities inherent within 21st century school contexts, which teachers must navigate and respond to effectively. And one recurrent theme which permeates through such large-scale surveys is the emphasis placed on reflective practice as practitioners assume the role of teacher as researcher to improve the quality of their teaching. Now, in past decades, terms associated with reflective practice, such as the reflective practitioner, reflective teaching, and the teacher as researcher, have been introduced into teacher education and classroom contexts based on the assumption that acquiring skills associated with reflective practice should guide individuals toward becoming more effective. Yet, an exploration of the concepts and themes which underpin these terms reveal a number of variations. A further dilemma concerns their widespread usage and common currency as topics of considerable importance in educational discourse, textbooks, research publications, and government policy documents, where so very often little or no reference is made as to how these terms are understood, interpreted, or being used. An assumption of shared meanings seems to prevail. Complex phenomena reside at the heart of reflective practice for professional development in teacher education, which, if the goal to raise teacher quality is to be realized, must be unpacked so that constituent components can be fully recognized and understood. The framework presented here provides a unique pedagogical tool which can be used to guide, structure, and capture evidence of reflective practice across 9 dimensions. These dimensions have been identified through an in-depth analysis and synthesis of the literature on reflection and on reflective practice to capture relevant concepts and theories advanced by eminent scholars, researchers, and practitioners working within the field over the past century. The following slides aim to showcase some, yet by no means all, given that we have the space of time of 1 hour, of the concepts and theories which underpin the design of this framework. Situated at the core of this framework, reflective practice is defined as a disposition to inquiry, incorporating the processes through which student, early career, and experienced teachers structure or restructure actions, beliefs, knowledge, and theories that inform teaching for the purpose of professional development. The 2 key interrelated strands, a disposition to inquiry, and the processes embedded within this definition, will now be explored. Reflective practice as a disposition to inquiry has at its roots the early work of John Dewey, specifically in relation to the reflective attitudes of open-mindedness, responsibility, and wholeheartedness, which he considers to be both prerequisite and integral to reflective action. Open-mindedness refers to the willingness to consider more than one side of an argument and to fully embrace and tend to alternative possibilities. This requires an active desire to listen to more than one side and to recognize that formerly held views and beliefs could be misconceived. Responsibility refers to the disposition to carefully consider the consequences of actions and the willingness to accept those consequences. Dewey argues that misconceptions and confusion can arise when individuals profess certain beliefs, yet are unwilling to commit themselves to the consequences that flow from them. Wholeheartedness refers to the way in which open-mindedness and responsibility come together through an interest and enthusiasm of some situation or event. As Dewey writes, a genuine enthusiasm is an attitude that operates as an intellectual force. When a person is absorbed, the subject carries him on. Questions occur to him spontaneously. A flood of suggestions, further inquiries and readings are indicated and followed. The material holds and buoys his mind up and gives an onward impetus to thinking. The work of several theorists into the nature of the teacher as a professional extend Dewey's discourse of reflective attitudes. In distinguishing between restricted and extended professionals, for example, Hoyle describes extended professionals as those who demonstrate a high level of classroom competence, exhibit a pupil-centered approach, have a high level of skill in handling pupils and in understanding them, derive great satisfaction from working with pupils, and evaluate their own performance in relation to perceptions of change in pupils' behavior and achievement. Building on Hoyle's work, focusing particularly on the teacher as researcher, Lawrence Stenhouse argues that the outstanding hallmark of extended professionals is their capacity and commitment to engage in autonomous self-development through systematic self-study. 5 key attributes that characterize extended professionals as they research their own practice incorporate the need to reflect critically and systematically on their practice. They have a commitment to question their practice as the basis for teacher development, have the commitment and skills to study their own teaching, and in so doing, develop the art of self-study. They appreciate the benefit of having their teaching observed by others and discussing their teaching with others in an open and honest manner, and have a concern to question and to test theory in practice. Some 2 decades later, the characteristics and attributes identified by Hoyle and Stenhouse resonate with Michael Ehret's interpretation of accountability, which can be exemplified when professionals demonstrate a moral commitment to serve the interests of students by reflecting on their well-being and their progress and deciding how best it can be fostered or promoted. Professional obligation to review periodically the nature and effectiveness of one's practice in order to improve the quality of one's management, pedagogy, and decision-making, as well as professional obligation to continue to develop one's practical knowledge by personal reflection and through interaction with others. The reflective attitudes of open-mindedness, responsibility, and wholeheartedness, characteristics and key attributes of extended professionals, and qualities of the teacher as a professional signpost how reflective practice as a disposition to inquiry has been interpreted within this framework. Although articulated some years ago, it can be argued that these same concepts and theories remain highly significant for teachers working within the context of 21st century schools, and they do permeate through the professional standards teachers must evidence to demonstrate personal effectiveness across the national and international educational landscape. Moving on to the second key strand, the processes embrace numerous concepts and theories related to the nature of reflective activity and its translation into professional practice. These have been captured within 9 discrete yet interrelated dimensions of reflective practice, as shown in the framework earlier. Each dimension provides a specific focal point to guide, structure, and capture evidence of reflective practice. Although presented in a linear, sequential manner, it is important to note that any dimension can provide the initial catalyst for reflective practice, and that each is inextricably linked and related to others in multifarious ways. They have been separated out and deconstructed purely for explanatory purposes. If we look at dimension 1, study-owned teaching for personal improvement, an understanding of reflection, how it might be structured and used to guide practice, lies at the very heart of self-study and professional development planning for personal improvement. Dewey associates reflection with the kind of thinking that involves turning a subject over in the mind to give it serious consideration and thought, which incorporates 5 phases. These are problems, suggestions, reasoning, hypotheses, and testing. Practitioners must place each phase within the context of past and future actions and experiences. When pieced together, the phases form a process of reflective thinking, which Dewey writes involves a state of doubt, hesitation, perplexity, mental difficulty in which thinking originates, and an act of searching, hunting, inquiring to find material that will resolve the doubt, settle and dispose of the perplexity. Feelings and emotions are woven into Boud et al.'s approach to reflection, as teachers are encouraged to recapture their experience, think about it, mull it over, and evaluate it through association. This means relating new data to that which is already known, making links between feelings and ideas we may have about teaching. Integration, which means seeking relationships among the data and making sense of associations in some way. Validation involves determining the authenticity of the ideas and feelings which have resulted and trying out new ways of viewing and understanding teaching. Appropriation is the 4th type, which involves making knowledge one's own. This is taking ownership of new insights and learning to inform future teaching. These approaches to reflection exemplify how reflection can become a powerful agent of understanding self, as practitioners recount not only what they observed in a given context, but also their emotions, feelings, ideas, and thoughts as to future possibilities, central to which should be a review of teaching in relation to the outcomes that were sought. Here I show you just an example of an experiential learning theory, which is presented by Kolb. And here, reflection is explicitly linked to a 4-stage cycle that can be summarized as immediate or concrete experiences, provide the basis for observations and reflections. In turn, the observations and reflections are distilled and assimilated into abstract concepts. These produce new possibilities for action that can be actively tested through experimentation, which in turn create new experiences. Kolb describes this process as self-perpetuating, in that the learner shifts from actor to observer, from direct involvement to analytical detachment, which creates a new form of experience to reflect on and conceptualize. His theory is built on the notion that experiential learning involves recreating personal lives and social systems rather than the application of a series of techniques to current practice. Moving on to dimension 2, which considers systematically evaluating teaching through classroom research procedures, I start by suggesting that although there is some debate concerning how teachers should conduct their inquiries to resolve teaching concerns, the work advanced by Carr and Kemmis and McKiernan is appropriate here, as well as Hopkins' notion that central to the concept of teacher as researcher is the systematic reflection on one's classroom experience to understand it and to create meaning out of that understanding, all of which provide a useful springboard. This interpretation is firmly located within the realm of the practitioner and exemplified through the process of reflection on action that derives from the work of Donald Schon, which teachers use to interrogate their own practice and answer questions about the quality of teaching and learning taking place. This form of critical self-reflection can be viewed as the systematic and deliberate thinking back over one's actions and described as a self-reflective spiral of cycles of planning, acting, observing, reflecting, then replanning, further action, further observation, and further reflection, which builds on Kolb's theory of experiential learning and Wood et al.'s approach to reflection. Systematically reflecting on the data gathered lesson by lesson to consider why particular outcomes were realized in the light of a particular strategy is arguably the hallmark of action research and underpins this dimension. Teachers can be introduced to the time process model devised by John McKiernan, which illustrates an important feature of action research, notably the cyclical nature of an ongoing process to improve the quality and effectiveness of practice. The first stage is to clarify and define the problem, and the next is to conduct a literature search to establish current theories and research related to the area. An action plan is then devised, which outlines the teaching and learning approaches teachers anticipate they will use, data they will collect, and instruments they will use to gather this data. In light of the specific class they will be teaching, they plan the first lesson, drawing from the cluster of approaches already identified. They teach this lesson and gather data, which captures pupil response to the teaching, interrogate the data in much the same way as analyzing a lesson evaluation, and reflect upon and decide how they will teach the following lesson. They then plan and teach the second lesson, collect and reflect on data, and so the cycle continues. Ideally, the step-by-step process is constantly monitored over varying periods of time and by a variety of mechanisms. This might, for example, involve questionnaires, pupil diaries, interviews, and case studies, so that the ensuing feedback may be translated into modifications, adjustments, directional changes, and redefinitions as necessary. In other words, through ongoing formative evaluation, successful elements can be retained and built upon, whereas less successful elements can be modified or discarded in light of the teacher's reflections. Theories associated with learning to teach emerge from at least two perspectives. Espoused theories, which advance propositional or explicit knowledge, those seen by a profession to guide action and encompass the formal philosophy of the profession, and theories in use, procedural knowledge and tacit knowing, which incorporate those patterns of behavior learned and developed in the day-to-day work of the professional. This distinction arose from concern that there was a gap between the proposition or espoused knowledge and theory that purports to underpin professional activity and the reality of how a professional behaves in practice. Sean argues it is the latter type that more aptly characterizes the real behavior of professionals, to which McIntyre adds, the kind of knowledge that research can offer is of a very different kind from the knowledge that classroom teachers need to use. Cultural knowledge provides a third perspective on teachers associated with learning to teach. This type of knowledge is also context-specific and embedded within the shared assumptions and beliefs that are used to perceive and explain classroom reality, and to assign value and significance to new information and ideas. Although Sean acknowledges professionals must acquire a body of specialized knowledge, he asserts that such knowledge cannot simply be applied in a rule-governed way to guide practice, and presents the view that professionals generate their own theories in use or personal epistemology of practice. At the heart of his discourse is the emphasis placed on professional artistry. By this, we mean the repertoire of teaching approaches and strategies practitioners gain from experience provide exemplars, images, and metaphors they can draw upon to frame each new teaching situation. Framing a situation involves interpreting it one way as opposed to other possible ways, and this process must be viewed as experimental, since imposing meaning onto the situation by taking action leads to particular consequences which should then be evaluated. What emerges from his discourse is that intelligent action can be shown in the capacity of practitioners to respond effectively in particular situations. Sean describes intelligent action as knowing in action, which he claims can be intuitive as we reveal it by our spontaneous, skillful execution of the performance, and we are characteristically unable to make it verbally explicit. Although this knowledge is inherent, intangible, intuitive, spontaneous, and tacit, it works in practice. He aligns this form of knowing in action to reflection in action, which occurs when practitioners encounter an unknown situation or a surprise occurrence in the learning environment triggers it off. The process of interpreting and providing solutions to complex and situational problems happens during an action as events unfold. The pursuit of linking theory with practice also implies that teachers need to be able to analyze critically the research evidence they read as part of their professional role, and to judge its findings and conclusions from a well-informed point of view. This builds on Stenhouse's view that the purpose of educational research is to develop thoughtful reflection so as to strengthen the professional judgment of teachers, which can be realized when teachers subject their own practice to critical scrutiny and rational reflection informed by literature and research. Moving on to dimension 4, to question personal theories and beliefs. Pajares states that defining beliefs is at best a game of player's choice. They travel in disguise and often under alias. Attitudes, values, judgments, axioms, opinions, ideology, perceptions, conceptions, implicit theories, personal theories, rules of practice, practical principles, repertoires of understanding, to name but a few. This explains in part why conceptions of epistemological beliefs or beliefs about the nature of knowledge and learning take on different shades of meaning in the epistemic literature. In traditional philosophical inquiries, conceptions tend to assume universal knowledge claims and absolute truths. By contrast, in cognitively orientated research, conceptions tend to focus on the acquisition of knowledge, organization of information, and justification of knowledge claims in relation to what individuals believe about the degree to which information is true. The latter perspective, which primarily focuses on the nature of intellectual growth and the relationship between personal, epistemological, and learning, is particularly relevant here. All teachers have personal theories and beliefs about themselves as teachers, their teaching, the nature of knowledge, how learning takes place, and their roles and responsibilities within the classroom. Research has shown that many of these are shaped by former experiences. For example, the acquisition of folk pedagogy, which reflects certain wired-in tendencies and some deeply ingrained beliefs, lay cultural norms and beliefs so strongly ingrained that most teachers' education, as it is currently structured, is a weak intervention to alter particular views regarding the teaching and management of diverse learners, as well as thousands of hours teachers spend as pupils themselves in the classroom that can act as a filter or lens through which they interpret and view the content of initial teacher education and become a major force once they enter their own classroom contexts. To understand their own practice, it is important that teachers examine personal theories and beliefs, as these have been found to influence their perceptions and judgments, which in turn has an effect on their classroom practices. As teachers' theories and beliefs directly influence pupil learning and development, it is imperative the foundations upon which they are predicated are scrutinized to ensure they are not based on outdated or erroneous information. Failure to periodically re-examine personal theories and beliefs for their validity in light of new information can lead to mindless teaching or habitual behavior. Looking at dimension 5, which considers alternative perspectives and possibilities. Although questions of significance to teaching and learning can involve private, inner conversations with self, Paulo Freire argues the need for practitioners to adopt a reflective posture. By this, he means one that enters the public arena and examines personal experience through conversations with others. According to Jerome Bruner, we construct ourselves through narrative, and by telling stories of our lives can make sense of our lives. The knower is inextricably linked to the known, and knowledge making is recognized as an active, creative, interpretive process in which the telling and retelling of stories provide a framework for the construction of professional knowledge in teaching. Pendlebury uses the metaphor dialogical other to describe how a conversation between a student teacher and significant other can be structured in a supportive way. Within her three-stage approach, the dialogical other first guides the student teacher to reflect on the aims and means to devise a course of action for a particular situation and teaching group. Second, challenges and critiques this course of action to invite the student teacher to formulate sound justifications for decisions and judgments made, and respond to any perceived developmental needs. Third, facilitates the construction of an improved course of action as considered necessary. In this way, the dialogical other simultaneously affirms and encourages the interrogation of the student teacher's own voice and assumes the role of a critical friend. An important aspect of this process concerns the endeavor to add meaning to what the student teacher claims to know. For some, this might be perceived as a threatening experience, particularly when core values and beliefs are questioned and improvements to practice advocated. This process incorporates the second component of Freire's reflective posture, in that conversations not only explore previous experience, but also focus on the possibilities of future practice. Sean's models of coaching reflective practice, these are called Hall of Mirrors, Joint Experimentation, and Follow Me, are designed to show student and early career teachers how a particular setting appears through the eyes of experienced practitioners and how they might frame problems of practice. These models juxtapose two perspectives on learning: learning about learning and learning about teaching, which promotes double loop as opposed to single loop learning. Implicit within such discourse is recognition that several possible meanings can be associated with any course of action in relation to a particular teaching group within a particular context. At the core of this dimension is open-mindedness and the desire to listen to more sides than one, to give full attention to alternate possibilities about the content, methods, and procedures used in classrooms. There is a need to constantly reevaluate your worth in relation to the students currently enrolled and to the circumstances. One asks not only why things are the way they are, but also how they can be made better. Moving on to dimension 6, which is concerned with trying out new strategies and ideas. I want to start by suggesting that teaching is a demanding profession that requires a complex matrix of knowledge, skills, and understanding to judge which strategies are most appropriate in accommodating the needs of different groups of learners and each individual learner. The complex nature of teaching requires that teachers build a range of knowledge bases they can draw upon and relate to their own practice. Building integrated knowledge bases requires an active approach to learning that leads to understanding and linking new to existing knowledge. Jennifer Moon presents the view that learners approach their studies with a cognitive structure, a flexible network of ideas and knowledge shaped by their prior learning. This cognitive structure provides the framework within which teachers locate new ideas and will, if deep learning is to occur, be challenged and modified or transformed in the process. Moon associates the development of new understandings, insights, and increased awareness with deep as opposed to surface learning. The euphemism transformative learning describes situations where teachers are prepared to abandon preconceptions and re-examine their fundamental assumptions about themselves, subject matter, and the nature of knowledge. As teachers actively critique and challenge what they claim to know, the insights gained are expressed in terms of new possibilities for teaching, and they reconstruct and reframe personal theories and assumptions about their own practice. Through integrating new strategies and ideas, teachers take ownership of their teaching as they appropriate new knowledge, which gives them the degree of autonomy needed to make professional judgments in response to each unique situation. As teachers gain experience and generate their own theories of use, they can challenge aspects of propositional knowledge that are incongruent with their authentic experience in the real world of teaching. In recent years, a number of major trends have taken a central role in the classroom and transformed aspects of the curriculum, such as the awareness of global issues, living in multicultural societies, issues of gender and sexuality, as well as numerous learning opportunities opened up by the rapid advances in new technologies. To enable capacity building within the personal, interpersonal, and organizational structures of 21st century schools, the Australian Government Quality Teacher Program presents the view that teachers should be empowered to pursue and apply new knowledge in an environment that supports professional risk-taking. In so doing, they can stay abreast of new developments and, importantly, minimize the risk of professional obsolescence. Moving on to dimension 7, the principles of entitlement and inclusion underpin this dimension. And this requires teachers to ensure that all pupils can access the curriculum by setting suitable learning challenges, responding to pupils' diverse learning needs, overcoming potential barriers to learning, and devising assessment appropriate for individual pupils and groups of pupils. This can be particularly challenging within 21st century schools, as teachers are called upon to deal with an increasingly diverse cohort of pupils with different needs and different aspirations. The emphasis in Europe on developing transversal competencies amongst pupils across traditional curriculum subjects and themes, and in England on personalized learning, illustrate the requirement placed on teachers to tailor learning to accommodate individual aptitudes, needs, and interests. This is to ensure all pupils realize their full potential, irrespective of background and personal circumstances. Planning for progression in pupil learning requires teachers to take into account a number of factors: their knowledge of the pupils, theoretical perspectives on how learning happens, which might involve cognitive development, concept development, constructivism, information processing theories, and social constructivism within the teaching process. They need to understand what constitutes progression in their particular subject area and what demands are placed upon their own pupils in relation to specific tasks. As Hargreaves and Fullen write, it is what teachers think, what teachers believe, and what teachers do at the level of the classroom that ultimately shapes the kind of learning that young people get. The key message here is that teachers should structure and design a range of learning experiences which enable all pupils to achieve the aims and objectives and intended learning outcomes, and these should be formulated in light of the principles and procedures which underpin entitlement and inclusion. There are, however, many competing forces at play which teachers need to navigate, as this illustration shows. The introduction of common core standards in certain parts of the world has resulted in the same test for everyone, and I would argue that this signals the very antithesis of what we understand by the principles of entitlement and inclusion. Moving on to dimension 8, which is concerned with the quality of one's own teaching, teachers must acquire a range of knowledge bases and models for teaching and consider how they might transform this knowledge into meaningful learning experience for all their pupils, both within specific subject areas and across the wider curriculum, in relation to short, medium, and long-term objectives. This dimension is therefore inextricably linked to the previous one and supports Schulman's claim that what teachers teach is as important as how they teach it. The metaphor pedagogical expertise has been used to capture the art of teaching, which refers to responsive, creative, and intuitive capacities of individuals, the craft of teaching, which incorporates the mastery of a full repertoire of skills and practices, as well as the science of teaching, which is research-informed decision-making, and combines the complementary needs for personal capacities, professional skills, and collectively created knowledge, firmly underpinned by ethical principles and moral commitment. This construct reflects current national and international initiatives which aim to build a professional knowledge base about what constitutes effective teaching and learning through combining teacher expertise and research. Systematically reflecting on the outcomes of each lesson, searching for reasons as to why the learning or lack of learning occurred by examining the minutiae and constituent components of teaching and modifying future planning and teaching on the basis of this reflection, helps teachers to build upon their professional knowledge bases and make professional judgments from an informed evidence base, which should then enhance the quality of their pedagogical expertise. The principles of assessment for learning are embedded within the pedagogical approaches to teaching advanced by the Department for Education and Skills in England back in 2004. And as Black suggests, an assessment activity can promote learning if it provides information to be used as feedback by teachers and by their students in assessing themselves and each other, so as to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. Such activity becomes formative assessment when the evidence is used to adapt the teaching work to meet learning needs. The final dimension is concerned with continuing professional development in order to continue to improve their own teaching. There is widespread agreement that initial teacher education cannot provide prospective teachers with all the knowledge, skills, and understanding required to handle various tasks and meet the strong demands of educational reform and social change throughout their professional career. Becoming a teacher is increasingly acknowledged to be a gradual process, which means that teacher education must be seen as a career-long process placed within the context of lifelong learning. Continuing professional development has been described by Christopher Day as the process by which, alone and with others, teachers review, renew, and extend their commitment as change agents to the moral purposes of teaching, and by which they acquire and develop critically the knowledge, skills, and emotional intelligence essential to good professional thinking, planning, and practice with children, young people, and colleagues throughout each phase of their professional lives. This implies that CPD needs to be built into a teacher's career trajectory from the outset. The development of new skills, initiatives, teaching methods, and ways of working require practice, feedback, and training in situ, as well as time available outside the classroom. Research has shown that through working collaboratively with peers and experts in communities of practice, professionals can contribute to the co-construction of new knowledge and ideas and strengthen the connections between research and practice, encouraging schools to develop as learning organizations. Encouraging outcomes of the learning communities witnessed in action by Professor Dinham were the extent to which dialogue and innovation around quality teaching and learning have emerged and reinvigorated jaded mid to late career teachers, and the degree to which latent leadership potential has emerged, which in turn facilitated further change and improvement in the groups, faculties, and schools concerned. Now, that takes care of explaining what is some of the thinking that underpins each of the 9 dimensions which have been deconstructed in order to explore what each points toward and signals. And what we have here is that I'm sure each of you out there is fully aware that when you talk to individuals or when you work with colleagues, there are distinctions between the way in which they engage in reflective activity. And so an important shift in terms of working more coherently through what is understood by reflective practice was, again, looking at the work of scholars, researchers, and practitioners, which have presented concepts and theories which sought to capture qualitative distinctions in reflection and reflective practice. And once again, through an in-depth analysis and synthesis of these, 3 types of reflective conversation have been identified and superimposed onto the dimensions of reflective practice framework as shown here. It is important to be clear that within any discourse, more than one type of reflective conversation might be evident as the conversation unfolds, moving from descriptive through comparative toward critical. Thus, although separated out for clarification purposes, each type of discourse should not be viewed as mutually exclusive, as reflective conversation can be dynamic and fluid phenomena, and intimately intertwined to compose a composite concept. The terms discourse and reflective conversations are used here interchangeably to denote ways of thinking and speaking about teaching, as well as of practicing teaching. To understand what underpins the distinctive nature of each type of reflective conversation, it is important to consider 2 constructs. These are dualism and relativism, and the relationship between them. Of significance to the way teachers see and interpret any situation are theories associated with different patterns of thinking and of how knowledge is constructed. And we will briefly consider the progression from dualism toward relativism from 3 perspectives. Dewey not only places an emphasis on the need to develop certain skills of thinking and reasoning to become a reflective practitioner, but also draws a sharp contrast between reflective and routine action. He describes reflective action as the willingness to sustain and protract that state of doubt which is the stimulus to thorough inquiry, so as not to accept an idea or make a positive assertion of a belief until justifying reasons have been found. Reflective action considers the assumptions underpinning any form of knowledge or belief and the consequences which might follow from action that incorporates such knowledge or beliefs, which includes a conscious and voluntary effort to establish belief upon a firm basis of evidence and rationality. By way of contrast, routine action is guided by a disposition to accept the most commonly held view of resolving a problem in a given situation in a routine, almost thoughtless way. No attempt is made to experiment with alternative strategies or viewpoints. Rather, attention is directed toward the means to achieve specific ends that are taken for granted and guided by such factors as authority, custom, expectations, institutional definitions, and traditions. Baxter-Magolder presents a 4-stage model of epistemological condition, which are absolute, transitional, independent, and contextual ways of knowing. With absolute knowing, knowledge is seen as certain or absolute. Learners believe that absolute answers exist in all areas of knowledge. When there is uncertainty, it is because there is not yet access to the right answers. Such learners may recognize that opinions can differ between experts, but this is in difference of detail, opinion, or misinformation. Formal learning is seen as a matter of absorption of the knowledge of the experts. Learning methods are seen as those that concern absorption and good memory of fact. Assessment is simply checking what the learner has acquired. Knowledge is a commodity, and learners are there to get it and teachers to pass it over. At the other end of the continuum, with contextual knowing, knowledge is understood to be constructed, and any judgment must be made on the basis of the evidence in that context. The way in which knowledge is constructed is understood to relate to the consideration of the quality of knowledge claims in the given context. Opinions must now be supported by evidence and the recognition of contextual influence. The knower and receiver of the knowledge are both seen as relevant to the process of knowing. The viewer of the teacher is of a partner in the development of appropriate knowledge. The learner sees herself as a constructor of knowledge. King and Kitchener present a 7-stage model of reflective reasoning. Stages 1 to 3 are embedded within what they term pre-reflective reasoning. And here, what they mean is that there is belief that knowledge is gained through the word of an authority figure or first-hand observation rather than evaluation of evidence. People believe that what they know is absolutely correct, and they know with complete certainty. They treat all problems as though well-structured. Their stages 4 to 5, they speak of in terms of quasi-reflective reasoning. Here, recognition that knowledge, or more accurately, knowledge claims, contain elements of uncertainty, which people who hold these assumptions attribute to missing information or methods of obtaining evidence. Although they may use evidence, they do not understand how evidence entails a conclusion, especially in light of the acknowledged uncertainty, and therefore tend to view judgments as highly idiosyncratic. For stages 6 to 7, which they term reflective reasoning, there is the acceptance that knowledge claims cannot be made with certainty, but they are not immobilized by it either. They make judgments that are most reasonable and about which they are relatively certain, based upon the evaluation of available data. They believe they must actively construct their decisions, and knowledge claims must be evaluated in relation to the context in which they were generated to determine their validity. They must also be willing to re-evaluate the adequacy of their judgments as new data or new methodologies become available. Against this backdrop, the distinguishing features and characteristics of each type of reflective conversation used within the dimensional framework of reflective practice can be better understood. I'll just take a moment here. This type of discourse is based on concrete experience, as teachers examine and frame aspects of their own classroom practice. It can be characterized as a retrospective personal account of teaching, which involves returning to experience and providing a detailed description of that experience. As individuals experience the world through their own lens, sense of reality, or form of consciousness, descriptive reflective conversations enable teachers to search for patterns and trends that can emerge as they try to make sense of their own teaching. This provides an important foundation for the generation of living educational theory and the development of their personal epistemology of practice. Teachers can examine the situational context-specific nature of their experience by responding to such questions as, what was taught? How was it taught? Did pupils achieve the intended learning outcomes? What teaching strategies were effective or ineffective? How do I know? What does this mean? How does this make me feel? And how might I do things differently next time? Clearly, different types of question involve different patterns of thinking. The question, how was it taught, requires a reflective process analysis of the approach that has been followed. It is formative in nature and aims to develop abilities. How might I do things differently requires a reflective self-evaluation of a particular type of performance, using criteria against which judgments can be made. This is summative in nature and aims to develop goals and standards individuals set for themselves. Cohen uses the terms analytical reflection and evaluative reflection to distinguish between these two types of process. The question, how does this make me feel, appeals to the affective aspect of a teacher's practice, and discourse arising from this question can reveal insights into their disposition to inquiry. Moving on to comparative reflective conversations, this type of discourse requires teachers to reframe the focus of their reflection in light of multiple perspectives, alternative views and possibilities, research findings from literature, as well as their own engagement with prior experiences. Comparative reflective discourse is evidenced when teachers relate personal assumptions, beliefs, theories, values, and their conceptions of teaching to that of others. It is a meaning-making process which moves the teacher from one experience into the next, with deeper understanding of its relationships with and connections to other experiences and ideas. This type of discourse is essentially a deliberation among choices of competing versions of good teaching, and it involves moral, ethical, and value commitments, as well as questions concerning aspects of teaching, such as how pupils learn and the nature of pedagogy. Comparative reflective conversations may include such questions as, what alternative strategies might I use in my teaching? How might colleagues and or pupils explain what is happening in my classroom? In what ways can I improve the ineffective aspects of my practice? Having established learning objectives, in what ways can these be accomplished? How do colleagues accomplish these same goals? For each alternative perspective, whose learning needs are addressed and whose are not? This highlights the need for teachers to search beyond personal assumptions and theories, as a range of possibilities concerning one particular aspect of their teaching might emerge, dependent upon whose perspectives are being considered. Comparative reflective conversations have resonance with transitional knowing and quasi-reflective reasoning. Looking at the last of my qualitative distinctions concerning critical reflective conversations, I'd like to start by suggesting that critical thinking is at the core of this type of discourse, which Jennifer Moon defines as the capacity to work with complex ideas, whereby a person can make effective provision of evidence to justify a reasonable judgment. The evidence, and therefore the judgment, will pay appropriate attention to the context of the judgment. Further, the fully developed capacity to think critically relies on an understanding of knowledge as constructed and related to its context, and is not possible if knowledge is viewed only in an absolute manner. This type of discourse is therefore characterized by the acceptance that knowledge claims cannot be made with certainty, and teachers make judgments that are most reasonable and about which they are relatively certain based on the evaluation of available data. They believe they must actively construct their decisions and that knowledge claims must be evaluated in relation to the context in which they were generated in order to determine their validity. Teachers also readily admit their willingness to reevaluate the adequacy of their judgments as new data and new methodologies become available. And this type of discourse has resonance with contextual knowing and reflective reasoning. Critical reflective conversations can therefore be evidenced when teachers ask such certain questions about their teaching as, how does my choice of objectives, learning outcomes, and teaching strategies reflect the cultural, ethical, ideological, moral, political, and social purposes of schooling? Now that, in essence, is the thinking, the theories, the concepts drawn from multiple scholars over more than a century have come to inform. And as I explained at the beginning, this is by no means exhaustive. It really is just trying to give you a flavor of what has gone into the thinking behind the design of this particular framework. I would just briefly like to go back to the second part of what was my PhD, which comprised research with a year 4 cohort of the student teachers who were undertaking action research as part of their final school placement. And basically there were 80 student teachers in this cohort. There was kind of almost an equal balance between male and females. And initially I ran a semi-structured questionnaire, semi-structured in that there were kind of quantitative Likert scales and that sort of thing to capture degrees of influence, degrees of importance, and that sort of thing, but always with the caveat that there was explanatory. They could explain reasons behind why they had scores at any particular point along the continuum. And after the analysis of the questionnaire data, I then proceeded to interview, and these were semi-structured interviews, 12 of these student teachers, 6 males and 6 females, in order to try to figure out what qualitative distinctions in reflective practice could actually be drawn between these student teachers. Now, it is important here to note that any results or findings that I present here needs to be understood within the context of these student teachers speaking about their experiences in relation to engaging with action research. And the framework has far more value in terms of, challenging different aspects of curriculum design and development and engaging students in different forms of activity. So these need to be understood against that background. And so from these 12 semi-structured interviews, there was a total number of 4,770 reflective conversations captured. And they're presented here in terms of the frequency of those that were descriptive, those that were comparative, and indeed those that were critical, with the associated percentages alongside. And there were some key findings that I really would like to just share with you. And these concern the highest frequency in dimension 8, which should come as no surprise because this really was concerned with the nature of enhancing the quality of their own teaching. And the lowest dimension, the lowest was in dimension 4, which really came as somewhat of a surprise because this is questioning personal theories and beliefs. And so in terms of the reflective conversations, the highest frequency, 52.6%, were descriptive. Critical, interestingly, was marginally higher than comparative. And with regard to questioning personal theories and beliefs, there was descriptive moving into comparative and then into critical. How this looks, if you put it graphically on a scale, is shown here with the various percentages or the frequency. I also picked up a notable range within dimension 5, which considers alternative perspectives and possibilities, and found that there was a high measure of dispersion in descriptive and comparative dimensions too. Let me just catch and make sure I don't misguide you here, which is to systematically evaluate teaching through classroom research procedures, which actually was quite surprising given that they were engaging in action research. And then again in 8, which again concerns the quality of teaching, as well as the critical dimension in critical reflective conversations in dimension 8. And overall, what was revealing that the trends appear to be similar. Females, although trends were similar, females were found to use fewer descriptive and more comparative and critical conversations than the male student teachers. However, greater variance was found in the reflective conversations between female rather than male student teachers. I think I've lost my slide here. Trying to keep up with myself because I know I've got to hand over to Vera quite swiftly. Just want to finish in a number of dimensions. And this kind of led me into thinking that there is need for further research into qualitative distinctions that can be demonstrated between male and female student teachers, and how this knowledge might actually inform the curriculum design of initial teacher education. And it also motivated me to look at ways in which I could develop learning pathways to support the transition from surface to deep to transformative learning within and between each of the dimensions of reflective practice. And this latter aim of mine has been translated into a book that came out in 2012, which presents my framework and also offers a great deal of support to student teachers, early career and experienced teachers in terms of becoming an extended professional through capturing evidence-informed practice. Vera, are you there? And shall I stop sharing?
I'm here.
Good.
Thank you very much, Paula. So you're handing the word to me now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so very much for that. I was just thinking of how all this that you were presenting was interacted in my own research while I was doing my PhD. You just mentioned that your book was launched in 2012.
Absolutely.
Right? So I was very lucky indeed, because I started in 2013, my PhD, and I was familiar with your framework from the very beginning. I mean,
perhaps you had access to my PhD thesis, which of course any PhDs become prevalent in the public domain. So it would have been in the British Library. So you may have actually found this and much of the thinking that went behind it, because my PhD was in two parts. One was a critical analysis of what can be understood by reflective practice, and the second part was how student teachers engaged with this whilst doing action research.
Well, I might have had contact with it before, but I do remember that I got it on Kindle. So it had been launched. Yes, it had been launched. I got it on Kindle, which is very handy. So what I did, I would like to explain briefly what I did with your framework. I think it's a fantastic way to apply it with student teachers, but the way I used it was with more experienced professionals. When I started the PhD, I already had the pre-project obviously in mind, but as things were developing, I obviously had to adapt, especially when I got to the analytical part. I had to apply many different concepts in one single piece of thing. I will make it clear. I will try to make it clear. So what I did was I invited my colleagues. They are all lecturers at the university here. They've given me permission, okay, to talk about this. I've been allowed. So I invited them to take part in my research. And I remember you mentioned at some point during your talk, you mentioned subjectivity to scrutiny. While a person is willing to do reflective practice, they have to be open to criticism. They have to do self-criticism. So they will be subject to scrutiny. And this might feel like uncomfortable for many people. People might feel like they are being, yeah, that's the word, scrutinized, right? And they may get reluctant to take part. So I was lucky actually to have all of them participating. Then what I will do now is I will share my screen with you. But before that, I have to say I did not present this framework to any of my participants. Not even now, because that was not the idea. I was using the framework to help, to guide me during the analysis, during the analytical part. So I did not present the framework to the participants, and I did not train them to use it. They were not introduced to it. I built a corpus with my participants' reflections. And when I was absolutely lost in the middle of all that data, corpus linguistics brings out so much information, and then you are sort of lost in the middle of so many words. So what I did was I constructed separate subcorpora to analyze, and part of the data produced was self-evaluation of my participants, written self-evaluation. Another part was spoken. I think it's very important value to written and spoken reflections. So that's how your framework came into the story. Let me share the screen. Bear with me. There are not many slides, okay? Hopefully this is going to be fast. Are you following there? Let me put it on presentation mode. Wait a moment. I'm not sure if I am on presentation mode.
No, really, you're not yet.
Not yet. So how does this work?
From the beginning. Up there.
Here?
On the left. Yes.
Okay. There we go. Well, I've got a black. I just have a black screen.
Yeah. From us. Can you go back, please?
So I will stop sharing. Go back there. Here, share. Still, it's a black screen.
Yeah, you don't need to go all the way back. Just do this. Okay. You can
Present?
do from the current or present to both work. Okay, now go.
So I am obviously jumping a little bit, guys. I'm not going to give you all the framework for what I did, or the background, because this is Paula's show, not mine. So anyway, the title of my thesis was Reflections of Brazilian English Language Teacher Educators, a discourse analysis of introspective and collaborative approaches to professional awareness. The first part of the work with my participants was self-observation, as they observed themselves on video, and also they observed each other's classes. So this is like peer observation. After this, they wrote their first piece of writing. And then there was a post-observation peer discussion, which is after observing your peers' class, you give them feedback. After receiving feedback about your own class, then you write a second piece of writing. Self-evaluation of your practice, right? And then they get together with all the other participants of the research for a third for a third draft of their let's call it self-evaluation. Okay, so this is a brief of what went on. Self-observation, writing, feedback, peer observation and feedback, writing, and then group talk, and then writing. So what I did was I collected this, it was video recorded, the class was video recorded, but I didn't analyze the classroom interaction. This was not my intention. I only used this for the participants to be able to see themselves and to recollect what went on so that they would write. I've recorded post-observation discussions, and this was very important for my analysis. And I also audio recorded the group discussion. And these were transcribed and analyzed as separate corpora: the feedback discussions, the self-evaluations, and the group discussions. What I wanted to see was how the interactive tasks contributed to broaden the reflections of the participants individually and possibly contribute to an increase of awareness. So I used AntConc. AntConc is for the name Anthony. Anthony, the creator of AntConc Concordancer. That was the software that I used. And the interpretative processes of the discourse consider linguistic aspects in association to social direction. So that's how this framework entered. Because when I was analyzing, I was interested in the content reflected upon. And this was discussed in terms of typologies or dimensions of reflection. For me to categorize, let's say, then I used this framework quite a lot. The other things are not of interest here because I really wanted to focus on how do I stop sharing now? Here, stop. So I am not going to go deeper into the analysis and all because this would be a more enclosed thing with the participants, but that's how I use the framework, more or less. Paula, was that clear?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I can't hear you. I think you're on mute, Vera.
I am sorry. Because I am jumping here with the browsers. So I would like to see if there are questions here posed to you. Pardon me if the order is not right, but I've got one from Esther Villalva. Pardon me, Esther, if the pronunciation is wrong. Oh, she's asking about the keyword. This is going to be divulged right now. Perhaps you can help me with the questions, Emerson, if you got some there.
Well, actually, there aren't any yet.
Fiona says that she would like to hear some of your thoughts about formally assessing reflective practice activities on teacher education programs. She says, I am referring to artifacts like reflective diaries, blogs, portfolios, etc.
Well, I think that I think that these are very insightful. These are very, very insightful tools, and it depends what lens you're using in terms of doing any form of assessment. I think if you're looking for evidence of for example, if you're looking for evidence that they are actually considering personal theories and beliefs, you can actually relay that to that particular dimension I have. If you want to ask yourself whether or not they are thinking about Yeah. I mean, I can see how my framework could be applied to such a thing, because you could then use the particular 9 dimensions as a lens for exploring where it's prevalent within the diary, and by looking at the way in which they talk about things or reflect upon things, or the questions that they ask. This is hugely important, you know, to move from that dualist to relativist position, which characterizes the qualitative distinctions in critical reflective conversations. It's important what types of questions they are asking themselves in relation to their own development as a teacher. I would argue that there is a lot about teaching that cannot be assessed. I mean, this doesn't come clearly through, but if you look at the sort of triadic model that I presented in terms of pedagogical expertise, there is the art of teaching, you know, and how does one even begin to how does one begin to assess one's enthusiasm, one's commitment, one's passion, you know, the empathy portrayed and that sort of thing. So there is an awful lot of teaching that is not measurable. But I think it was Albert Einstein who actually said, not everything counts not everything that measures, not everything that one measures counts, and not everything that counts is measurable. There's something about Albert Einstein and something he said there. How do I feel about it? Well, I think that they're quite revealing and insightful, and you can learn quite a lot about, you know, where they're at in any given moment in time in relation to the task at hand. Does that answer the question, or is there more?
I would say so. Yeah. Thank you very much, and very good quote there. Absolutely. I was thinking that this could be used by those who are reflecting, those students who are reflecting, or those who are evaluating the students. I was very concerned when I first started my project to be the one who would be, you know, judging. The judgmental aspect was definitely something that I wanted to avoid. So what I did with my data was the participants were evaluating themselves, and I really tried to, you know, to avoid directly saying that anybody was right or wrong while doing something. Instead, the participants, through their talks with each other, by giving feedback to each other, I could see if one was really agreeing or disagreeing with ways of doing things, and how they would develop their reasons for giving feedback in the way that they were.
That's absolutely critical, and I think too, coming in there just one moment, going back to artifacts such as written journals and that sort of thing, you know, and how one goes about assessing that. Is what parts of that would you consider assessing? Is it the way they describe a particular event as it unfurls? Are you looking for whether or not they are actually comparing and contrasting this particular pathway with that, or approaches and new possibilities? What is in their discourse that actually enables you to say, well, this is an example of critical reflection. This is actually, you know, we have this with master's dissertations all of the time. And how is it when you have 2 blind markers on a student's dissertation, you've got the criteria that you're using for assessment, and how it can actually sometimes, because there's blind review, people come up with different judgments. And, you know, it could be a different grade band, which I think is hugely problematic. So no easy task, not at all. And I don't think that everything that emanates from reflective practice and reflection is measurable. You know, I don't think so at all. But I think that this provides us with some kind of a framework where we can look for particular things. You know, it is, I think it encompasses much of what we're about when we talk about learning to teach and that sort of thing.
Oh, definitely. I really have to pay attention to 2 things at the same time to see if there are some extra questions here. I actually got one from WhatsApp asking you what would be the correlation between the ideas of Paulo Freire and your thesis in general.
Well, I really like the work of Paulo Freire, and I think that, you know, it also has resonance with Carr working with, and I think that, you know, it is this notion of assuming a reflective stance, and is actually, I think, at the end of the day, what is important is that I think that all of these things that I'm referring to, 1 through 9, and then the sort of the qualitative distinctions, I think that one would try to enable these to become part of one's entity, so that you're not having, you know, that they become part of the way in which we approach our work, we approach our thinking and teaching and that sort of thing. And so it is the reflective posture and the sort of stance of stepping back and thinking of new possibilities. But going back to Carr's work, I would actually say that it is part of you. It is assuming a critical stance, and it's a sense of becoming.
Right. So Tatiana, let me see what the surname is, sorry. Tatiana Costa has written something. I've also posted there in the chat for you to see better on the right of your screen there. So I believe teachers tend to read a lot about methodologies as opposed to psychology.
Sorry, can you read that again?
Okay, I believe teachers tend to read a lot about methodologies as opposed to psychology. For me, though, to start out, one must learn more about oneself and observe more the others. Listen more and observe more. What do you have to say about it?
I think that that's absolutely right, because I think the notion of beliefs and theories and all those sorts of things about our thinking and ways of approaching things can be enhanced significantly by observing others and more experienced teachers who have a degree of experience. You know, this chimes well, I think, with Albert Bandura's mastery experience, where we engage in observing others so that we can question what it is we're doing and perhaps capture. I don't think any of us is ever the final product. There is always something new to learn. And I firmly believe that every new teaching that each teaching concept presents ourselves with a new situation that is absolutely unique. It hasn't happened before. When we confront a class of 30 children, you know, where are they in the moment at that particular time, you know, of the day? It may be that they've come in from another environment and they're hyper and they're all over the place, you know, and somewhere along the line, this could be a situation that some teachers may find taunting. And so, you know, what are some of the things that people do in order to arrest the situation so that you can get all students on track quite swiftly so that you can move forward? And other things that happen completely out of the blue and they're unexpected. So I think we're always on our toes, and it's always a sense of becoming. I don't think that we ever truly arrive. And I think that that's actually quite fruitful to bear in mind, because there is always something new. Children are unique. All 30 individuals in a class are unique. And how much do we understand and know their ways of thinking, their ways of being? And so I think to look to, I don't know if this one, the psychological connection is hugely important. We do need to understand the theory of mind, and we do need to understand the frames of mind. And here I would really go back to the folk pedagogies that Jerome Bruner writes in Culture and Experience. It's chapter 4. And, you know, if teachers actually view children as imitative learners as compared to knowledgeable learners, then they are going to approach their particular teaching in a given way. They're going to provide opportunities, you know, the didactic process product kind of approach that was prevalent not too long ago, and perhaps is evident in some classrooms today, I think would strongly chime with the with the philosophy or the belief or the theory that children learn by imitation, by modeling and that sort of thing. Whereas if you look at the knowledgeable, the mind, his model of mind, which is much more concerned with learners as knowledgeable, then one would take into account the cultural and historical perspectives that go into any given activity that you want to do in the learning environment, and that would shape how you approach and present material and opportunities that you give to children.
Right. Thank you so very much. That totally takes us back to Freire, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But now it takes us back to Paulo Freire, I would say, yeah, what you've just said. Now, Kevin Howe has a question there. I think you can see it on the screen.
I absolutely would. I absolutely would. On my own learning.
Consider doing a postdoctoral study on your learning since you completed your thesis?
I absolutely would, because I think that the whole process and coming to this book and all the rest of it, and now I'm moving forward. I mean, I'm changing all of the time. And I think this has incredible value, but I would add so much more now. There is so much more in terms of, oh, I should have considered this. I should really have interpreted this in a slightly different way. How can I make sense of this? And my own learning and growth is, it has been triggered. And so, yes, I actually would like to think about how this might have had an impact on me in moving forward. I'm always out for a challenge. Kevin, thank you.
Great. That's absolutely great. I don't know if you're familiar with the University of Limerick has got this PhD in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And it is a university that deals a lot with reflective practice and a lot with corpus linguistics. So I felt very much like I was in the right place as I started my PhD for this reason. The whole environment really embraces the idea of reflective practice. And I had no idea of this before. As I stepped there, I started to realize, oh my God, I am meeting the authors of the books I had been reading, and this was very exciting, all very, very enriching, really, to me. So, Paula.
No, Kevin has now addressed you through the same question. Would you consider doing a postdoctoral study on your learning since you completed your thesis?
Oh, definitely, yeah. In the same way as Paula said, I think I would definitely have to rethink some of the things related to the way I organized the whole study. But I would like to go deeper into something very specific in terms of teaching awareness. It's got a very deep psychological side to it. It's complicated when we go to some different fields that we are not very, very familiar with. So psychology didn't enter that much into the study, but in the end it does, because when you're dealing with language, you will deal a little bit with psychology, right? So Paula, I have to be careful not to leave anyone's questions here. So I have to tell everyone that the keyword for the event is framework. Okay, it's been written there, framework. I have to thank Paula so much for taking her time to discuss her framework with us. And I hope to see you again in my way. I hope to meet you. And this will be a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to share this work with you and your audience.
Thank you. So we end here. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, everybody from Ireland, from the UK. It was very nice to see you. Bye.